Quote love, unquote. Chapter 13. They'd get used to flying first class, Kayama had promised, as she'd laid out the plans to get them to Miyakojima. But after weeks of travelling the country in a tour bus, it was a bit much to be handed flutes of champagne as they take their seats in the luxury cabin. And some things, well, there are some things that Kirishima is sure he'll never get used to. "You're in the in-flight magazine!" Kaminari jeers at him, leaning over the back of Kirishima's seat to rub his knuckles against the crown of Kirishima's hair. "You've really made it now!" Jiro, sitting next to Kirishima, twists around in his seat to bat Kaminari away. "We're all in that magazine, you know." "Yeah, but we're not all on the cover," Ashido adds, putting up her footrest and lounging back as far as possible. "Don't forget us now that you're super famous, Kirishima." Kirishima laughs, because he's not sure what else to do when he's nervous. "It's not like that," he mutters, trying to tilt his head away from the magazine. But wherever he looks, from every seat back pocket, there's a familiar flash of red hair and his wide grin. Kirishima, standing back to back with Amajiki, like he's someone people would buy a magazine for. Amajiki still thinks like that too. He told Kirishima as much as they'd been styled for the photo shoot. So maybe things like this will always be a bit surreal, no matter how much other people tell him he deserves it. Honestly, he liked doing the photo shoot. The stylists were nice, and the photographer was awesome, and working with Amajiki is always the best thing that's ever happened to him, even though they've been on tour for weeks together now. But the night before the interview, he'd stared at his phone for hours, thumb poised over the call button. "Hey Bakugou," he imagined saying. "You've been on a ton of magazine covers before. How do you deal with it? How does it feel to have everyone staring at an image of you, all the time?" He thought of the Best Jeanist billboard outside his apartment, of how he'd stared at Bakugou's smouldering gaze, and wanted him so badly. With that thought in his mind, and with his last memory of Bakugou being the other men walking away from him, Kirishima hadn't been able to work up the courage to call. And that had only been one moment of many over the past several weeks. Every time he got off stage, every time he wrote a particularly good new lyric, every time he saw a new city and fell in love with it. He wanted to share all those things with Bakugou. When he stood in front of the camera the next day, he thought, if Bakugou stared at me the way I stare at him, what would I want him to see? He wanted to be friendly, but enticing, welcoming, but impressive, someone you'd want to get as close to as possible, and who you'd be happy to be around once you were in their orbit. He wanted to be someone who'd pull you back in, even if you managed to break away the first time. And now, identical copies of that image stare back at him. As the seats around them start to fill, other passengers pull out the magazine and flip through it, to the snapshots of Sun Eater and Riot, to the interviews with all the band members, to the rest of the stories in the magazine. Well-bred as first-class passengers tend to be, none of them turn to gawk at the four of them, sitting in 2 rows of 2. "You should get some sleep," Jiro says, tapping Kirishima gently. "We might not get the chance again for a while." Behind them, Kirishima and Ashido are training Pokemon on their handheld systems. Their chattering is a comfortable background noise, and Kirishima lets himself drift off. It's easier than thinking about where they're going, and who else is there. Kirishima turns his phone back on when they deplane some hours later. His screen immediately lights up with 3 new text notifications, and Kirishima stares at them with gritted teeth. "Why now?" he mutters, pulling his guitar case over his shoulder. "What is it?" Jiro says from behind him, lugging a case of her own. The label arranges to ship most of their equipment, but neither of them want to leave their trademark instruments to others. "Nothing," Kirishima says, slipping the phone into his back pocket. Jiro rolls her eyes at him, fixing him with a stare. "You know it's no secret that Bakugou is here, right?" Ashido and Kaminari are walking a few paces ahead, and they pointedly do not look behind them as Jiro broaches the topic of conversation. Kirishima wonders if they planned this, to have Jiro be the one talk to him. "You don't have to spend so much time worrying about me," Kirishima tells her. "It's been over a month, If Bakugou wanted to talk to me, well, he could have called. Jiro doesn't tell him that he could have called himself. That's what Ashido's been reminding him of for weeks, sometimes gently, and sometimes not. 3 nights ago, she'd thrown a pillow at his head and told him to stop pining if he wasn't going to do anything about it. They've been worried about Ashido, ever since their last performance with Present Mike, when she'd frozen on stage singing a song to Sero. It's not that she's been different. In fact, she's been almost defiantly optimistic, as confident and energetic as ever. But they've known each other for long enough for the rest of them to recognize a front when they see one. Kirishima usually only joins her in singing for their encores, for that single song. When their voices mingle together, he can feel every emotion she's keeping locked away. But he can't tell her to call Sero, or to leave behind her feelings for him if they're causing her pain. He doesn't know what type of advice she wants, and which would serve her best. Jiro sighs from beside him. I really wish I could fix all your problems for you, she says. All of them. Desperate to shift the mood, Kirishima opens his mouth to ask how Yayozuru is. She, at least, has been texting and calling Jiro non-stop. But before he gets the chance, Kirishima is blinded by a series of camera flashes, so bright and quick they're like a chain reaction of bombs, each setting off the next. What the hell? Kaminari says, from somewhere in front of them. Riot! Someone calls out, cheerful and too loud. Welcome to Miyakojima! How do you feel about performing here tomorrow night? Ashido-san, another yells. Can we get a comment on your outfit? Ashido says, cheeks turning red. She's wearing leopard print sweatpants and a loose tank top, one of Kirishima's hoodies tied around her waist. Kirishima-san, a third person says. How are things going with you and Bakugou-san? He doesn't know how to respond, and it seems like none of the others do either. For the length of their tour so far, they'd gone from place to place via tour bus. They usually arrive at their hotels in the early hours of the morning, or late at night. There's never been a reception like this waiting for them before. Off to one side, someone clears their throat. Excuse me, a good-natured voice says, long arms waving to get everyone's attention. But Riot's not taking any questions right now. In fact, I have a car waiting, everyone. Come with me. But the 4 members of Riot stand frozen in their tracks. Ashido moves first, hand extended as she takes an abortive step forward. Sir. And sure enough, there stands Sero Hunter. He's wearing crop pants and a polo shirt, the way he stands conveying nothing but authority, even as he smiles his widest. In response to him, the paparazzi have begun to disperse. Sero blinks at Ashido, smiling sheepishly. Before he can say anything to her, there's a blur of motion. In one moment, Jiro standing beside Kirishima. The next, she's taken 3 quick strides forward, arms swinging as she punches Sero straight in the jaw. He goes staggering back, stunned and reeling. You've got some nerve, Jiro spits. She points a finger at him, face a mask of fury. Apologize! Jiro, Ashido says weakly, clutching at her sides. She starts laughing, a rich sound of her voice filling the air. It's okay, really. Kaminari goes over to help Sero up, even as the last few lingering paparazzi snap a few photos. Sero massages his jaw, then shrugs. I do have a car waiting for you, he says. He casts a long, lingering look in Ashido's direction, but turns finally to Kirishima. And we need to talk. The car ride is awkward, to say the least. The 5 of them sit in the back 2 rows of the seats, as the driver heads for the hotel where Riot will be staying. Sero presses his elbows against his knees, looking at him like he's not sure why he's the persona non grata. I did text you, he says to Kirishima. Kirishima runs a hand over his hair, mussed from the plane ride. I know. Sero had sent 3 messages, all in quick succession. You're heading to Miyakojima next, aren't you? I can make time for you to meet Bakugou if you want it. You two really need to talk. Ashido, Jiro, and Kaminari all look curiously at Kirishima. Jiro's lips are still pursed with anger, but she agreed to let Sero give them a ride. Kirishima considers laughing all of this off, but instead he sighs. Look, it's been 6 weeks. If Bakugou wanted to talk to me, he could have called. And, well, I do have some pride, you know. Bakugou hadn't even wanted to hear it last time. Kirishima had worked up the courage to tell him how he felt, and Bakugou had pushed him away entirely. He's had weeks to think about it, despite how hard he's tried to distract himself with the tour. And fuck, it hurts. He wants Bakugou to want him as much as he wants Bakugou. He wants that to be worth more than anything else. But it's not, and how can he keep throwing himself forward when Bakugou is never there to catch him? Sero shakes his head, his smile twisting into something ironic. Look, Kirishima, Bakugou is an idiot. Kaminari and Ashido start laughing, but Jiro just nods empathetically. Some of the anger fades from her gaze, like Sero's begun to redeem himself for that comment. He is, Sero insists. I mean, he's the smartest guy I've ever met, but he's still an idiot. And he's been miserable for weeks, because he refuses to let himself call you. Part of Kirishima wants to retort, wants to snap that if Bakugou was so miserable, he could have called. But another part of him just hates the thought of Bakugou being miserable at all, if there's something he can do to help. He misses you, Sero says softly, looking down at his clenched hands. I know he does, so I'm asking you, as both a friend and his manager, to talk to him, because if he screws up this movie because he's too busy thinking about you, I won't be happy about it. Sero looks up and grins, and Kirishima sees his friend more than Bakugou's manager. His heart softens. Okay, he says after a moment. Okay. Great! Sero claps his hands together, because this is your stop. The car pulls over abruptly, and Sero opens the door. Before Kirishima can blink, Ashido and Kaminari are pushing him out onto the street. Wait, now? Guys! Guys! As soon as Kirishima gets his feet under him, the car speeds away. Some days, Kirishima's not sure whether his friends are the best or worst thing to ever happen to him. But he takes a deep breath, because Bakugou is waiting for him. It's a bar, not the kind of place that Kirishima imagines Bakugou in at all. Kirishima shuffles self-consciously, very aware of the fact that he's wearing the crushed clothes he's been in for the entire plane trip. A sleeveless hoodie that leaves his arms bare, and loose dark pants tucked into his designer red sneakers. The sneakers were a gift from the designer, not the type of thing he'd buy for himself. His hair is unstyled, half of it pulled back into a ponytail. This is not how he'd choose to see Bakugou after 6 weeks. But he's so close, and somehow that stokes Kirishima's courage into a single desire. To see Bakugou, to drink him in and hold his hands, and be with him. He heads into the bar, expecting to find Bakugou waiting there for him. Instead, he sees Bakugou sitting at the bar with someone else. Someone who's tall, broad, and handsome, and who's leaning into Bakugou's space like he deserves to be there. He's got dark hair and a dazzling smile, and fuck, he's hot. His dark eyes flash under the bar's amber lights, and Kirishima has never felt more inadequate. But then he pulls his eyes away from the dark-haired man and back to Bakugou. Bakugou, who's sitting ramrod straight, his eyes narrowed as he glares at his companion, his hand clenched too tightly around his bottle of beer. He radiates unhappiness and hostility. Despite that, Kirishima pauses for a moment just to look at him. The pale hair, the furrow of his brow, the pressed line of his lips. Kirishima has missed him so much. And for a moment, it's enough to just see him so close. But then the dark-haired man leans back and laughs. And there's something discordant about that laughter. Bakugou stiffens even more, but the dark-haired man leans closer, one hand hovering just above the small of Bakugou's back. Rage like fire burns through Kirishima. What's wrong with this guy? Can't he tell that Bakugou doesn't like it? When Kirishima steps forward and gets a good look at the way the man is looking at Bakugou, the fire within him blazes red hot. The man is looking at Bakugou with intent. And though Kirishima has always known how much the world loves Bakugou, how people have half-naked posters of him in their rooms and scream for his attention, this is different. This is someone looking to cut through the facades of stardom and get to Bakugou's core. The reality that Bakugou has shared with Kirishima. And Kirishima finds that he doesn't want anyone else to have it, not when they make Bakugou look so angry and uncomfortable. Sero had said that Kirishima could make Bakugou less miserable. And maybe that starts with making him comfortable, and soothing away some of the tension that's radiating off him in waves. If Kirishima can do even that much, this will have been worth it. He sucks in a breath and gathers his courage, stepping closer to the bar. He doesn't know if Bakugou hears him approach. He acts on instinct, laying a hand on Bakugou's shoulder. He doesn't think of it like laying a claim. He's reminding Bakugou that he has another option, that Kirishima will always be an option if Bakugou wants him. "Hey," he says, addressing both of the men at once. He squeezes Bakugou's shoulder, just to reassure himself that Bakugou is really here. "What's going on here?" The dark-haired man looks up, but he doesn't look unhappy to be interrupted. Rather, his eyes light up like stars. "Oh, the boyfriend. This is unexpected." "Is it?" Kirishima asks, before he can help himself. "Is it weird that he's just shown up here? Is Bakugou going to be mad at him for it?" But that uncertainty is quickly swallowed by another feeling. Protectiveness. Bakugou hadn't been happy with this guy looming over him, and now he's leaning against Kirishima like he's happy he's here. Like Bakugou is comfortable now that Kirishima has arrived. "I mean, of course I'd come see my boyfriend the first chance I got." Bakugou leans back against Kirishima. "Fuck off, Shindo." And it isn't until that moment that Kirishima makes the connection, realizes who he's standing in front of. Shindo Yu, a relatively famous television actor, and perhaps someone Bakugou is working with. He's definitely someone in the industry, which means Kirishima has probably just interrupted something very important. Somehow, he's not quite as ashamed of that as he should be. "Hi," Kirishima says, stepping away from Bakugou to extend a hand towards Shindo. "I'm Kirishima." Bakugou lets out a grunt of annoyance. Shindo is smiling widely, the amber lights of the bar accentuating his handsome features. High cheekbones, the elegant curve of his lips. "Oh, I know," he says, shaking Kirishima's hand firmly. "I mean, the tabloids say enough, even if Bakugou here doesn't say anything about you." "Didn't you hear me, shithead?" Bakugou barks. "Get lost." Kirishima laughs, turning his head to look at Bakugou. "Hey, don't be rude." He turns back around quickly, because Bakugou's eyes are burning like coals, and if Kirishima focuses on them, he doesn't think he'll be able to look away. "It's fine," Shindo says, waving a hand. "I'm used to it by now." "You and Bakugou are working together then?" Kirishima asks. Shindo nods, leaning his elbow against the bar and propping his chin against his hand. "That's right. I've already learned so much from him. I've always wanted to work with one of UA alumni. Those guys are all in a league of their own, you know." Kirishima laughs again, good-natured and not at all nervous. "Yeah, I know." Kirishima kicks him in the back of the shin, and Kirishima finally turns to face him. He's sitting on his bar stool with his arms crossed over his chest, expression somewhere between baffled and murderous. Is Shindo still speaking? Kirishima can't be sure, because his eyes meet Bakugou's, and it's like the past 6 weeks were just a dream. It's like he just surfaced from the deep ocean, and needs to take a gasping breath to fill his lungs with air. Because Bakugou's eyes are just as inscrutable as they'd been that night on Present Mike's balcony, and Kirishima can't wait anymore. He has to know. He reaches out, grabs Bakugou's hand. Bakugou doesn't pull away from him. Kirishima barely turns back to Shindo as he says, "Sorry, Shindo-san, can you excuse us for a second?" If there's a reply, Kirishima doesn't hear it. He's too busy trying not to trip over his own feet, as he tugs Bakugou along, trying to find somewhere private. Because everyone, Ashido and Jiro, and Kaminari and Sero, they were all right. He and Bakugou need to talk. Somewhere private ends up being a side hallway of the bar, in between the bathrooms and the kitchen. The space is cramped, but maybe that's for the best. This way, Kirishima can stop Bakugou from walking away. Bakugou only tugs his hand out of Kirishima's grip. "Don't manhandle me, asshole." Kirishima doesn't laugh, even though he wants to. Even though Bakugou's voice is familiar, and soothes something he didn't know was aching inside of him. "You didn't miss me at all?" Bakugou leans against the wall, arms crossed over his chest protectively. He looks at Kirishima and bites down on his lower lip, so hard that the flesh turns white. Kirishima waits, breath caught in his throat. He can't just impose his feelings on Bakugou. He wants to believe that Bakugou likes him, that they've come this far because something between them works. But there's only so far he can push and pull Bakugou, without Bakugou taking a single step of his own. Hands press against his shoulders, forcing him back against the opposite wall. Kirishima grunts as his back hits the wall, but there's no time to process beyond that. Because Bakugou is in front of him, crowding his space, and his face is one hair's breadth away from Kirishima's. And then there's no space between them at all, because Bakugou is pressing his lips to Kirishima's in a fervent, desperate kiss. Kirishima reaches up, claps Bakugou's face in both of his hands, and kisses him back. Unlike the first time they've kissed, there's no sadness here. It's a warmer feeling, something like relief blooming in his chest. The past 6 weeks of separation haven't changed anything. He and Bakugou are still drawn together like magnets, pulled impossibly closer together the instant they make contact. He licks into Bakugou's mouth, over the line of his teeth. Bakugou shudders against him, pulling him closer. Bakugou's hands move from his shoulders to the back of his neck, anchoring himself off Kirishima. This is the person who's consumed his every thought, just past 6 weeks and beyond. This is the person who crackles like a fire, his warmth drawing Kirishima in, even when he knows that if he moves too quickly, he'll be burnt. This is the person that Kirishima wants more than anything. Bakugou makes a noise in the back of his throat, one hand smoothing down Kirishima's bare arm, the other pushing up the hem of his hoodie to press against Kirishima's abdomen. And now, Kirishima shudders, arching into Bakugou's touch. For a minute, Kirishima is entirely sure of what they're doing, what they feel for each other. But then the shadow of 6 weeks ago falls over him, and all he can see is Bakugou walking away from Kirishima like they meant nothing to him at all. Have they ever been sure? It's painful, but he pulls away from the kiss. He plants his hands firmly on Bakugou's hips, and pushes him back. Bakugou growls, and all Kirishima wants is to kiss that expression off his face, to swallow down that growl. Instead, he takes a deep, steadying breath. He keeps his hands on Bakugou's hips, holding him back. "Hey," he says, his voice like gravel. "I missed you." Bakugou looks like he's about to punch him. He bites out, And whose fucking fault is that? The sheer audacity of that statement startles a laugh from Kirishima. Yours, you jerk. Bakugou hisses. Idiot, He cuts himself off, his breathing labored. His eyes dart nervously, focusing on everything but Kirishima's face. Kirishima leans in, pressing his forehead against Bakugou's to steady him. You miss me too? Whatever. Bakugou pushes off Kirishima's grip, presses forward to kiss Kirishima again. His hands are on Kirishima's neck once more, and Kirishima's mind goes utterly blank as it tries to process that Bakugou Katsuki is in his arms, kissing him like his life depends on it. Oh, this is what people write songs about. This is what's impossible to describe, to even process without putting it into some other form. Kirishima could spend the rest of his life trying to put it into words, trying to make poetry out of it. But what it all comes down to is that he's never cared about anyone the way he cares about Bakugou. And when Bakugou kisses him, Kirishima feels like Bakugou might actually feel the same way. And what would you even call that? The relief that comes from knowing your love is requited. Emboldened by that feeling, Kirishima pulls away from the kiss once more. Hey, Bakugou. What? Bakugou snaps. He might as well have said, stop interrupting. Be my boyfriend, Kirishima says, all in one breath. He can feel Bakugou breathe against his skin, the pulse of Bakugou's heart when he reaches out to press a hand against his chest. For real, I mean. Bakugou looks up at him, eyes bright as the oil in a candle. There's wetness in his eyes, and if Kirishima didn't know any better, he'd think that Bakugou was about to cry. Instead, Bakugou fists his hand into Kirishima's hoodie, holding him there. Kirishima bridges the distance between them, pressing his forehead against Bakugou's once more. You don't have to say anything, he says softly. Just kiss me, again. Now Bakugou is smiling, savage and fierce, and his answer is everything Kirishima hoped it would be.